And welcome back to Hannity. Robert Gates, he served as our nation's defense secretary from 2006 to 2011 under both President George W. Bush and President Barack Obama. And he's here again to talk more about the different leadership styles when it comes to serving as commander-in-chief in his new book, Duty. It's out in bookstores as of today. I thought the most damning thing that you could ever say about anybody in this book was what you said about Hillary Clinton. You wrote that Hillary told the president in front of you in 2007 her opposition to the surge in Iraq had been political because she was facing Obama in an Iowa primary, and the president then conceded vaguely that his opposition to Iraq and the surge had also been political. And you say to hear the two of them make these admissions in front of me was as surprising as it was dismaying. And you say a lot of nice things about Hillary in the book. Are you really suggesting that Hillary Clinton put her own personal political ambition above our troops? Because that's how I interpret that.
First of all, I think the book is pretty clear that when the president responded to Hillary's comment that he was vaguely agreeing that opposition to the surge broadly had been political, and I absolutely believed that, having lived through that in the spring of 2007 up on the Hill. There were two things that made me remember what Hillary had said. The first was that I was on the opposite side of the table. And Admiral Mullen and I used to joke, particularly in the first months of the Obama administration, when kind of every meeting in the Situation Room, everybody would trash the Bush administration and everything.
Talk about that a lot. Acting like you're not there.
The Bush team, you know, what a bunch of bums the Bush team were and everything. And we're sitting there thinking, what, are we invisible? We were integral members of that team. And so the fact that she would say something like that. But the other thing that struck me, and I guess made an impact on me, was because, frankly, it was an anomaly. I never, in the whole 2.5 years we served together, that was the only time I ever heard Secretary Clinton ever mention domestic politics in terms of her views or recommendations on decisions for the president. And the irony is she used that reference because she was very strongly with me in supporting the surge in Afghanistan against the recommendations of the White House staff and the vice president.
Well, doesn't that make it worse, though? Because she was supporting the surge, she's with you. She really agreed with the surge back then, but didn't support it. And that means not, as far as I'm concerned, that's the equivalent of not supporting our troops.
Well, I guess my attitude is that there's a difference between when you're a politician campaigning in campaign mode and a senator, and when you have executive branch responsibilities. And when she was Secretary of State, I never heard anything like that.
I understand. Maybe to me, that would be putting her personal ambition above the troops, which to me is almost unforgivable, and especially if she has the ambition of being a commander-in-chief at some point. I really enjoyed you had at different points in the book comparisons between President Bush and President Obama. You said it's difficult to imagine two more different men than George Bush and Barack Obama, and you had fewer issues with Bush, obviously. But you also talked about some similarities here, and you talked about, from early on, President Obama desiring to win re-election. What are the main differences you saw?
Well, I think the first big difference was that I was serving President Bush in the last 2 years of his administration. All the big decisions except the Afghan surge had been made in national security. He knew he'd made his historical bed and would have to lie in it one way or another. And he was never going to run for re-election, and neither was his vice president. I served in the first 2.5 years of the Obama administration, and frankly, I suspect that the same kind of sharp-elbowed politicos were present at the beginning of the Bush administration, but they were pretty much gone by the time I got there. So domestic politics, what I describe in the book as domestic politics, were a factor in every discussion of major foreign policy issues. And the thing I give President Obama credit for is that on several of these issues, like the surge in Afghanistan, he actually went against the political advice of all of his White House political advisors and the vice president.
Yeah, but it is interesting as I read the differences that you have between them here, stylistically, how Bush, you felt, was more comfortable around the military, where you didn't get the same sense that President Obama was comfortable around military leaders?
Yeah, he was, the way I describe it in the book is he was always respectful. He always gave the military leaders as much time as they wanted, listened carefully, was never nasty to them. But I always had the feeling with him, first of all, that he was suspicious of their motives, and second, that time spent with them was an obligation. Rather than something he enjoyed. And I felt that President Bush genuinely enjoyed being around these senior leaders.
What made you come to the conclusion that from day one President Obama was seeking re-election?
Well, I think that was pretty obvious. It didn't require a political scientist to figure that out.
So you felt every decision he made was seen through that political prism?
It was a part of the discussion. And what I say in the book is that, for example, in describing things like the Afghan surge, I say that the president was aware of the politics, but unlike Vice President Biden and then Chief of Staff Rahm Emanuel, was not driven by the domestic politics.
And interestingly, stylistically, you said they had more in common than you would have thought.
Well, they you know, like most presidents, they like to spend their time with close friends, and they didn't much enjoy the Washington social scene. I think one of the references that they probably neither one liked was that I thought both of them detested the Congress, including members of their own party.
Oh, you had a few nice choice words yourself for Congress.
And didn't want anything to do with them any more than they had to. And so, and comparing them to other presidents I'd worked for, I said they had the worst of both worlds. They were neither much liked nor much feared.
All right, when we come back, you have some interesting observations about Joe Biden that have gotten a lot of press. Also, Congress, you have some very harsh words for them. And you talk about war in a way that I think the country needs to pay attention to. And we'll get to that as we continue more with Defense Secretary Robert Gates coming up right after the break. And then later, coming up tonight, we have a distinguished studio audience. They're going to join this conversation. They will react to these explosive revelations made in the book and much, much more as Hannity continues.